Okay, so yes, I'd like to now invite up the producer. We have with us Faye Yuan. All right. The film was directed by Mai Ji Lee, who is Mai Ji's not here with us, but Faye, hello, thank you for being here. So let me give you the mic. All right, so let's begin. I mean, obviously there's quite a bit of content that I guess can be perceived as uncomfortable to view, right, and somewhat disturbing. So what type of challenges were there in getting this film made? I imagine when you brought it, to potential investors, producers, whatever, people may have had some questions. So what were some of the challenges in making a film like this?
Yeah, well, the first question I always get is, who's the audience? And it's like, look around you, this is the audience. But at the same time, I think this is a very, very culturally sensitive issue. I cannot stress that enough, especially in the West and all of the cultural and social stigma around dog meat, cat meat eating, and the racial attacks that's been very ubiquitous and still prevalent in this country against the AAPI community. And then the backlash, that you get from making a film that's like, well, what does this then have to say? And how does that complicate and simultaneously complicate and also broaden the discourse? So I think to that concern, I always say, well, it's clearly not mainstream culture. And that's what we always try to tell people. And it's a very, I'm prejudiced, obviously, because I'm a huge animal lover, but China did experience massive revolutions and wars, and coming out of those experiences, the people are very traumatized and food insecure. So to say that they don't have a history with dog eating, I think is false. But to say that this is a cultural tradition, I think is also overreaching. So there's a balance there. And this is why I wanted to feature a Chinese animal activist doing this kind of work who can go into the public spotlight and challenge these cultural tradition arguments. And I think it's very important that it comes from her and not just anyone, because then you run into all these like authenticity issues and can sound very patronizing. So.
Have you found in showing the film, are a lot of people not familiar with what's been happening? Have you found a lot of people saying, wow, I didn't even know about this? I mean,
yeah, even when we screened this to a Chinese audience, and this was in rough cut stage, and we wanted to get feedback from people living in China, they didn't know that places like Pei County existed. And I think that's a very urban bias, because those people who own dogs and cats and will spoil them and treat them as family members are part of this rapidly they live in rapidly evolving cities, and they tend to be upper middle class, or they have this sort of upper mobility, right? So they look at places like Pei County and they sometimes forget that places like this still exist. And one thing that I really liked about how media approached the film was that she was really able to get both sides of the story. Like on the one side, you had this very passionate animal rescuer activist, and on the other hand, you have this group of people, which you see in Act 2, who are defending their livelihoods, really, and also calling it their cultural tradition. And the way she approached it was very non-judgmental and open, really, to the possibility of filming everything and everyone.
I just want to give an opportunity for questions from the audience. If anybody has any questions or thoughts or reaction, feel free to raise your hand. Anyone at all? Okay, yes.
What was the hardest part about actually filming? Like, what continually was difficult, or what was the hardest day, I guess, whichever is more interesting.
The hardest filming days were definitely at the Yuling Dog Meat Festival, because it was just complete chaos. And she was also followed by a plainclothes policeman really on all of the production days. But those days, especially, she was, and we see him in all the footage, really. And he never intervened in any of the shots except that protest scene with the cops and you see like all the people in the streets, and she's running and she's trying to get the shot of the other animal activists there. That was the only shot where he intervened he kept putting his hand to the camera. So that was something that she had to navigate. But quite honestly, like Mijie was only 24 when she shot this. Every time I see this film, I was just kind of wowed by that factor. And it just speaks to the level of courage, and also intuition that she has when she was filming. Because I think, I'm Chinese, but I grew up in the States, and everything I read about the police system there is very scary to me. So if I were placed in that situation, I'm trying to film, and there's these people stalking me, following me around, putting their hands in my camera, I would probably recoiled, and probably like turn off my camera and given in and just call it a day. But she continued. She persevered. And I think it was because she kept her crew very small, like it was just her and the sound recordist, that the police, they didn't really see her as that much of a threat. But those days at the meat festival were very challenging. And also Yureng is a city in southern China. In the summer, they experience, as you saw, the torrential downpours. And so like the streets get flooded and everything like that. So it was also just a environmentally like challenge.
Yes, yeah. Oh, good.
I know you're also the editor of the movie, right? So you have to spend a lot of time with the footage.
Mm-hmm.
And animal lover and honestly a person. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, that was very hard. Thank you for asking that. I think the toughest part for me to edit was definitely the slaughterhouse footage, the processing plant / slaughterhouse, which was all in the same facility. She spent 2 days filming in there. So I took my time, you guys. I took my time. I didn't watch it in one sitting, but it is very grotesque in there, I will say. And I, don't come from like an animal activism background. And I know that, PETA probably has been showing these videos for years, doing this work in the States, like getting access into these slaughterhouses and filming there. But this was another level, because what they're doing is technically illegal. They just have the benefit of using this like cultural tradition cover to kind of cover up what they're doing. But it was very, very hard to watch, and I took many long walks in between. And what you guys saw probably was the distillation, 45 seconds, just distilled from 2 days of footage. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a question in the back there on the.
So I was wondering, like in the same vein, like how did you guys like make the determination or the balance between, especially with the more gruesome shots, like what to exactly show and what to not, or what to kind of like spare the audience versus like have it be like striking enough to actually make you like sit up or lean forward.
Yeah, I would be curious to also ask the audience that question, like whether you found the violence gratuitous. The direct answer to your question is we did many rounds of test screenings during Rough Cut and Pauline and Eris, my associate producers here, helped me organize many of them. But we did test screenings with Chinese audiences. We also did test screenings on college campuses, universities in the States, because those places tend to have Chinese students and also American students. And we specifically sought out like media studies programs, China studies programs, those kind of classrooms where you can have a kind of a real conversation about the film after students watch it. And that was always the number one question that we asked in the survey and the questionnaire and during the Q&A was, did you feel like the violence was gratuitous? And if so, like where did it start slipping into that territory? So yeah, I think we did like 6 different test screenings between rough cut and final cut, and that helped us a lot editorially making those decisions.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so the police culture, again, I don't want to make a generalized comment about this and what's going on in China because China is very big and all the cities, depending on north, south, east, west, it's very different. But Yuling specifically, we found that they were definitely turning a blind eye to what was happening. And I think that became very apparent when we saw the interview with the other animal rights activist. She was attacked twice on that trip, and she was robbed and she was beaten. And we actually didn't use this footage, but she went back to Yuling a year later and had got the same treatment, you know? And so I found her interview quite compelling in that way. And also, that fight that happened before the eviction, that went on for an entire afternoon. I edited it down to maybe 15, 20 minutes to kind of get the point across of what was happening. But just from watching that footage, you get the sense that as soon as they arrived, they basically had made up their mind that this woman has got to go. And part of it is that they really thought she was part of this like foreign interventionist force, and she wasn't Chinese, even though, as you saw in the footage, like her operation cannot be more Chinese and grassroots. So there was that fear that she had some sort of foreign agenda. And then the other thing was the men who kicked her out really hated her. That came across in that footage that I saw as well. And I get the sense that they had already, I don't know if they bribed the police or just made some kind of backhanded deal with the police about like, you know, how this woman has to go, and they're locals, right? The second part of your question, yes, there were people who were supportive of her in Yuling. The woman who actually leased her the shelter to begin with is local. And she didn't make the cut because we just couldn't fit her in. But she was very supportive of Yang's cause and actually had shown Yang different locations. So they had scouted locations for this shelter when they first arrived in Yuling.
Yes, I think do we have one more? Let's go on over here. Yes.
What was it like getting access to the slaughterhouses in those scenes? As well as, it's interesting you see Fan, he has a lot of pride in his family business, and then you see that dynamic with being in there kind of like on his property, which is really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit more about those pieces?
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite things about this particular film. Fan was very generous, to be frank, with the director. He gave her unrestricted access to basically all of the places that are part of his operation, you know, whether it was the restaurant or the processing plant or the slaughterhouse. He drove them around, he picked them up and chauffeured them around. And Media told me that she definitely was in actually Fan's camp before she started making the film. Pauline Ayres, I don't know if you guys remember this conversation we had with her, but she is part of, from that part of China, who people in her family believe that like dog eating is part of Chinese culture. So she grew up around that. And that's actually why she wanted to make this film, because when she saw all the uproar, like domestic and international, over the dog meat festival, she's kind of like, what is the big deal? So that's how she arrived in Yuling with her camera. She was just very curious, and she wanted to understand the other side, which is Yang's side of the story, and that's how they met. And that's one of the reasons why I made this film, is because it's a really rare opportunity that you have two people with diametrically opposed views, you know, coming together and giving each other a chance, really. And that was the foundation for this film. So when she approached Fan, she said the same thing. She was like, look, I'm trying to make this film because I'm just trying to understand, what is it that we Chinese people are so torn up about, with these dogs? Because I grew up kind of like you, so all like everything you're doing seems legitimate to me, and that's how I think she won him over. And even when she told Young, when she went back and was filming Young, she told Young what her conversation with Fan, and Young was like, I want to debate him. So then the director had to go back and was like, would you be open to that process if we were to film you two together, just to make sure that consent, right? That's important. And he was. And I actually thought that was it's a very revealing debate because they clearly disagree, but it was also very cordial. Like, it's not like those Twitter wars that you see happening in the States, It was somehow that in-person, face-to-face you kind of see in that moment both sides.
We have time for one last question. So I know you were waiting. Yes, go ahead.
So is the dog meat industry completely unregulated? Like you had alluded earlier that it is, under the guise of wholesale production. But yeah, just curious about the legality there.
Well, there are no legal dog farms in China. And in fact, the only country in the world that still has legal dog farms is South Korea, interestingly enough. Maybe North Korea, I don't know. But we've talked to different animal rights organizations, and it's South Korea that has dog farms. And when dogs are farmed legally, they're quite expensive because, imagining raising a bunch of dogs, they require a lot of vaccines. They can't live in close contact to each other. So it's a production to legally farm dogs. And in China, it's not done legally. And the trouble is, though, as you see in the film, or at least I hope you see in the film, it's just such a non-issue. It's been such a non-issue for a really long time, really up until people started owning pets and seeing them as family members. And I'm not saying that these same people don't eat meat or whatever, right? It's not the same. It's just that animal consciousness, this sort of animal suffering, it's a very new concept still. And it's especially, it permeates kind of the younger generation, which we show in the film, both through Xiaogu, her protege, and also the younger woman in the end who comes to her rescue. That's what they look like. They're very young. And that's why I think the trouble is that the social norms are changing faster than the law. And you see that in a lot of things with China.
All right, and so we are out of time, but I just want to quickly ask if anybody wants to, share information about it. Do you have plans for the film to be released yet, or is it going to be playing other festivals? What's the future?
Yeah, we're just at the beginning of our festival circuit, so we do have plans to play at more festivals. We actually don't have an international premiere yet, so that's something that's coming in 2023. And in the same time, we're also partnering up with local community organizations to do special screenings across North America. So you can find more information about that on our Instagram handle.
I was going to say, for updates, there's a website, Instagram.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Faye for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you all. Thank you.